Hermione took in the room. The 8th year head suite. 2 doors. 1 common space. She was exhausted. Her braid was already falling apart. Loose strands hung in her face. Her fingers were smudged with ink from taking notes on the train. She had spent the entire journey reviewing the revised 8th year curriculum. She dropped her bag on the floor. It hit the stone with a dull thud. Silence. The empty fireplace was swept clean. 2 heavy oak desks with clawed feet faced each other in the center of the room. She did not want to be here. Not really. She wanted to be in her bed in Gryffindor Tower. She wanted the noise. She wanted the younger years laughing and breaking things. She wanted to be surrounded by people who were still alive. Instead, she was here. The highest tower in the castle. Isolated. Because she was the head girl. She was supposed to be moving forward. Unstoppable. Competent. She had a title to uphold. She walked toward the door on the right. She opened it. A massive 4-poster bed. Red hangings. A bookshelf that was completely empty. The bare shelves looked wrong. They were waiting to be filled with things that didn't exist anymore. She pulled a small framed photograph of Harry and Ron from her pocket and set it on the nightstand. It looked incredibly small in the massive room. Hermione retreated to the common space. The portrait hole swung open. Footsteps. Slow. Even. Draco Malfoy walked in. He stopped just inside the room. He didn't speak. His eyes tracked the stone walls. Pale. Sharp jaw. He wore a perfectly tailored black jumper. Not a speck of dust on him. He looked like he had stepped out of a portrait, perfectly composed, completely untouchable. He set his trunk down next to the left door. "Granger," he said. His voice was clipped. "Dry." "Malfoy." She replied. He didn't move toward the couches. He stood there, perfectly still, inspecting the stones above the fireplace. Hermione crossed her arms. "Which room do you want?" "I don't care. I'll take the right one, then." "Fine." This was going to be terrible. She tapped her quill against her teeth 3 times. She didn't even realize she was holding it until the wood clicked against her enamel. His gaze dropped to the quill, then flicked away. He rubbed the faded edge of his dark mark through his sleeve. Just a quick motion. He dropped his hand instantly. "Did you bring the schedule?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "I have the patrol rotations." "Put them on the table." "I haven't color-coded them yet." He leveled a flat look at her. "They are schedules, Granger. They tell people when to walk down a hallway. They do not need to be colored. It helps with visual retention. It helps you pretend you have control over the universe." He countered. She glared at him. "I'll leave them on the table when they are done. I want to see them now. They aren't finished." "You are not the only person who gets to dictate the patrols. I am the one who spent the train ride drafting them," she snapped. "While you were sitting in silence in the perfect carriage." "I was observing," he said coldly. "You were brooding." "I was enjoying the peace before having to share a living space with a neurotic Gryffindor. I am not neurotic." You tap your quill against your teeth like a manic woodpecker. It is entirely neurotic. She lowered the quill and put her hands behind her back. The schedules will be on the table tonight. You can review them then. The portrait hole opened again. Professor McGonagall stepped into the room. She seemed tired. Older than last year. The war had carved lines around her mouth that hadn't faded. Miss Granger. Mr. Malfoy. Professor. Hermione said, standing up straighter. Malfoy gave a short nod. I trust the accommodations are acceptable, McGonagall said. Yes, Professor. Good. Sit down. Hermione sat on the red armchair. Malfoy sat on the green one. The space between them felt like a physical barrier. You are here because you are the head boy and head girl, McGonagall said. You are here to set an example. We will, Hermione said. I have a specific task for you too. McGonagall pulled a thick scroll from her robes and set it on the low table between them. Malfoy ignored it. Hermione leaned forward. A task? The Board of Governors has requested a memorial ball, McGonagall said, to honor the students who died in the Battle of Hogwarts. Hermione stopped breathing. Malfoy went entirely still. A ball? Hermione asked. Her voice sounded thin in her own ears. Yes. A party? A memorial, McGonagall corrected softly. It is meant to bring the houses together. To show unity. To heal. Malfoy finally acknowledged the scroll. And you want us to organize it? Yes, Mr. Malfoy. You want a Malfoy to organize a memorial for the people my side killed. His voice was perfectly flat. Dead. McGonagall met his gaze. I want the head boy to do his duty. I want the school to see that if the two of you can work together on this, they can move forward as well. They won't, Malfoy said. They will, Hermione argued instantly. She didn't even know if she believed it. She just had to argue with him. It's a good idea, Professor. We'll do it. Malfoy's tone was ice. Speak for yourself. I am speaking for the head duties, Hermione snapped. You are speaking because you can't stand silence. McGonagall stood up. You have 1 month. The date is set for the 31st of October. The budget is outlined in the document. I expect a preliminary plan by Friday. She turned to the door. Good night. She left. Silence rushed back into the room. It felt heavier this time. Hermione eyed the parchment on the table. It resembled a bomb. It felt like a trap. Malfoy stood up. He walked to his trunk. We should review the budget, Hermione said. He didn't turn around. No. Malfoy, we have a preliminary plan due on Friday. I don't care. You're the head boy. He turned around. I am a political prop, Granger. I am here so the prophet can take a picture of me looking sufficiently reformed. I am not organizing a party for the dead. It's not a party. It's a farce. It's a memorial. It's a sick joke, he countered. He took a step toward her. You want to pick out flowers for Colin Creevey? You want to decide what colour banners we hang for Fred Weasley? Hermione flinched. He saw it. He stopped. He rubbed his left arm again. I'm not doing it. He said quietly. You don't have a choice, she told him. Her voice shook. She hated that it shook. We both have to sign off on the plans. McGonagall made that clear. Then forge my signature. I will not forge your signature. Then we fail the assignment. I am not failing an assignment in my 8th year. Malfoy let out a harsh laugh. Of course. The world is ending, but Granger can't get an acceptable. People are depending on us. No one is depending on me. He focused on the wall behind her. Half the school wishes I was in Azkaban. The other half wishes I was dead. That is not true, she shot back. It is entirely true. And they are completely justified. Which is why I am not standing in front of them playing party planner. Hermione got up. She grabbed the scroll from the table and unrolled it. The parchment was thick and heavy. The budget numbers were written in crisp black ink. There's a list of vendors, she said. She forced her tone to be steady. For the catering and the decorations, we need to decide on a venue. The Great Hall or the grounds. He didn't move. I think the Great Hall, she continued. The grounds will be too cold in late October. And the Great Hall it's the center of the school. It's where the bodies were laid out, Malfoy stated. Hermione froze. Her grip tightened on the edges of the paper. Are you going to serve drinks where Lupin died, Granger? Are you going to put a buffet table where the Weasley boy was? Stop it. They want a memorial. They want people to dress up and dance over the blood. It's about healing. She yelled. It's about pretending it didn't happen. He shouted back. They stared at each other, breathing hard. She could feel the paper crumpling under her fingers. We have to do it, she whispered. Malfoy looked away. You do it. I'll sign whatever you want. I can't do it alone. You're Granger. You do everything alone. I don't want to do this alone. The words slipped out before she could stop them. His face went completely blank. I don't want to look at the list of names alone. She clarified. He didn't respond. She unrolled the document further. There's a section for invitations. We have to decide if we are inviting families. No. They have a right to be here. They will scream at me, he said flatly. They will see my face and they will remember who let the Death Eaters in. They will see that you are trying to make amends. People don't care about amends, Granger. They care about revenge. Not everyone is like that. Everyone is exactly like that. She tapped her quill against her teeth. 1, 2, 3. Stop doing that. Stop what? The clicking. It's driving me mad. She lowered the quill. Fine. If we don't invite families, we invite just the students. And the staff. Fine. We need a theme. A theme. His voice was hollow. Something respectful. Silver and gold. White. White. White it is. White flowers. White table linens. No music. It's a ball, Malfoy. There has to be music. String quartet. Nothing loud. Nothing people can actually dance to. People might want to dance. People want to get drunk and cry. Give them a string quartet so they have background noise. Hermione wrote it down. String quartet. Catering. The house elves can do most of it, but the budget allows for outside suites. From Hogsmeade. Honeydukes. Obviously. Don't get the sugar quills. They leave a mess. I wasn't going to. She scanned the parchment. She was actually doing it. They were actually doing it. I just think if we color code the memorial reads by house, it will be less or overwhelming, she said. He went perfectly still. Red for Gryffindor. She offered, tracking the ink lines. Blue for Ravenclaw. Green for Slytherin. Yellow for Hufflepuff. You are insane. It's practical. It's morbid. It's organizing. She yelled. It's doing something instead of just standing there feeling sorry for yourself. Malfoy walked over to her. He was taller than she remembered. He glanced down at her hands. Granger, if you cry on these parchment samples, I will have to order more, and I refuse to speak to the vendor again, he said. She blinked. Her eyes were burning. She hadn't realized. I'm not crying, she lied. He studied her face. He didn't mock her. He just seemed exhausted. You're shaking, he noted. I'm cold. He didn't argue. Turning away, he crossed to the desk by the window. He dropped into the heavy wooden chair and summoned a quill from his trunk with a lazy flick of his wand. What are you doing? She asked. I am claiming this desk, he stated. Do not put your color-coded nonsense on it. He reached out and tapped the wooden surface. This is the line. You stay on your side. I stay on mine. Hermione surveyed the empty desk on the left side of the room. She walked over to it and sat down. Fine, she agreed. Fine. She laid the scroll out on her desk. She picked up her quill. She tapped it against her teeth. 1, 2, 3. From across the room, Malfoy sighed. A quiet, rough sound. We are not using green for the Slytherin reads, he told the window. Hermione stopped tapping. Why not? Because it's gaudy, he muttered. White. White for everyone. It's cleaner. Hermione checked her notes. White lilies. She wrote it down. The line was drawn. But they were both sitting at their desks. A pile of chaotic parchment covered her side of the room. Ink-stained. Crumpled. Furiously annotated. On his side, perfectly neat stacks. It was Thursday night. The preliminary plan was due to McGonagall by breakfast tomorrow. For the past 3 days, they had existed in a state of hostile cohabitation. They woke up, ignored each other, attended 8th-year classes, and returned to the head suite to work on the memorial ball in absolute, punishing silence. Hermione rubbed her eyes. They felt like they were filled with sand. She picked up her quill. She crossed out a line on the catering menu. She tapped her quill against her teeth. 1, 2, 3. From the desk by the window, Draco didn't look up from his ledger. I will snap that quill in half. She dropped it on her desk. I'm thinking. You are creating a percussion symphony of anxiety. I'm trying to figure out the menu. The house elves want to make a 50-tier cake. Tell them no. I can't just tell them no, Malfoy. They are very sensitive about their culinary contributions. It's a memorial, Granger. Not a wedding. No one wants to look at a 50-tier cake while mourning their dead relatives. Hermione sighed. You're right. I'll ask for small pastries. Nothing overly celebratory. Good. She pulled another sheet of parchment toward her. The floor plan for the Great Hall. We need a plaque, she said. Or a monument. Something physical for the center of the room. To list the names of the fallen. No. What do you mean, no? We have to list the names. The names are already carved into the stone of the entrance courtyard, Draco said. And the bridge. And the walls. You don't need to put a giant slab of marble in the middle of a dance floor. It wouldn't be on the dance floor. It would be an anchor point. A place for people to leave flowers. They can leave flowers at the actual graves. Not everyone can visit the graves. This is for the students to have a place to mourn together. It's macabre. He countered, finally turning around. His face was a mask of cold efficiency. You want them to read a list of dead teenagers while drinking pumpkin juice. Let them have one night where the names aren't being shoved in their faces. Hermione pressed her lips together. She hated that he made sense. Fine. No plaque. Just the floral arrangements. Just the flowers, he agreed. She set the floor plan aside and pulled the guest list forward. We need to finalize the ministry invitations, she said. The minister's office owled again today. Draco dipped his silver quill in ink. Tell them to stay in London. We can't tell the Minister of Magic to stay away. Yes, we can. The ministry is going to turn this into a press event. They will bring photographers. They will want pictures of themselves looking solemn next to war orphans. Hermione stopped. She looked at the back of his head. That's cynical. That is politics. They offered to cover a third of the budget. We don't need their money. I reallocated the funds from the cancelled Halloween feast. We have enough. We need their support. It shows unity. It shows a photo op, he shot back. If Kingsley Shacklebolt wants to pay his respects, he can do it quietly. The moment you invite the ministry officially, you invite the Daily Prophet. Do you want Rita Skeeter critiquing the flower arrangements? Hermione shuddered. No. Then leave them off the list. Invite the students. Invite the staff. That's it. She crossed out the ministry block on her parchment. Fine. She pulled the next sheet toward her. The decorations. This was the hardest part. How do you decorate a room where dozens of people died? I'm trying to figure out the banners, she said. We agreed on white. White is the base, she corrected, pulling her sketch toward her. I'm talking about the trim. The accents. It does not need accents. It's a banner, Granger. Not a ball gown. It needs to look finished, she insisted. I was thinking gold. A thin gold trim along the edges. He stopped writing. He set his silver quill down with precise care. Gold. He repeated. Yes. Gryffindor gold. It's not Gryffindor gold. It's just gold. It symbolizes a new dawn. Hope. Draco let out a sharp, derisive breath. Hope. Yes, Malfoy. Hope. The war is over. So let's string up some gold foil and pretend everything is sparkling. He turned fully in his chair to face her. No. Hermione bristled. You don't get to just veto everything. I get to veto Gryffindor propaganda at a memorial service. It's not propaganda. It is entirely propaganda. You want to make it look like a victory parade. It was a victory. She snapped. People died. Granger. He shouted, his voice slicing through the room. It wasn't a Quidditch match. It wasn't a game. You don't wrap the dead in shiny ribbons to make yourself feel better about surviving. Hermione stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the stone floor. I am not trying to make myself feel better, she said. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the parchment on her desk. Draco stood up too. He didn't cross the invisible line between their desks, but his presence seemed to fill the entire space. Yes, you are, he said. You're frantic. You haven't slept in 3 days. You're trying to color-code a tragedy so you don't have to actually look at it. Don't tell me how I feel about this war. Then don't tell me gold trim is about hope. It's about you needing everything to have a neat, shiny conclusion. Not everything is bleak and hollow. She yelled. Just because you can't see past your own misery doesn't mean the rest of us have to live in it. My misery? Yes. You sit over there in your perfectly tailored clothes, acting like you're the only one who lost something, like you're the only one carrying the guilt of what happened. His jaw tightened. I am carrying the guilt of being on the wrong side. Then do something about it. I am doing something about it. He roared. The volume of his voice shocked her. He never yelled. He was always cold. Always contained. He stepped over the line. He crossed the center of the room until he was standing just inches from the edge of her desk. I am sitting in a school full of people who cross the hallway when they see me coming, he said, his chest heaving. I am sharing a suite with a girl who looks at me like I might curse her in her sleep. I am organizing a memorial for the people my aunt killed. What more do you want from me, Granger? Hermione met his gaze. She couldn't look away from his eyes. They were wide, frantic, completely stripped of his usual armor. I want you to stop acting like you're already dead, she whispered. He froze. You think I don't know what it's like? She continued, her voice trembling. The anger was draining out of her, leaving something far worse behind. You think because I was on the winning side, I'm perfectly fine? He didn't move. He didn't speak. I wake up every night thinking I'm back in your drawing room, she said. The words tasted like ash. She hadn't said them to anyone. Not even Harry. I feel that knife on my arm every time I close my eyes. Draco flinched as if she had struck him. His gaze dropped to her left arm. It was covered by the long sleeve of her sweater, but he knew what was underneath. He had stood there and watched it happen. I know it's not a victory parade, she said, her voice cracking. Tears were finally spilling over her eyelashes, hot and frustrating. I know we can't fix it with banners. But I have to try. I have to try to make it mean something, because if I don't, if we just leave it stark and white and empty, then what was the point? The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't a Cold War silence. It wasn't the bitter, resentful quiet of two enemies refusing to speak. It was the breathless silence of an open wound. Draco looked at her face. He saw the tears she was desperately trying to wipe away. He saw the exhaustion she couldn't hide anymore. He surveyed the chaotic pile of parchment on her desk, the frantic scrambling of a teenager trying to hold the world together with ink and paper. His hand twitched toward his left sleeve, but he forced it down in a jerky, uneven motion. He had no sharp retort. No cruel observation. The armor was gone. For both of them. He took a slow breath. The harshness in his face completely vanished, leaving him looking devastatingly young. "Gold," he said quietly. Hermione blinked. She sniffled, wiping her cheek with the back of her hand. "What?" "The banners," Draco said. His voice was rough. White, with a thin gold trim. She stared at him. He didn't look away. He didn't retreat behind his cold mask. "It's practical," he said softly. "It will catch the light from the floating candles." Hermione felt a strange tightness in her throat. It wasn't a sob. It was something else. "Yes," she whispered. "It will catch the light." Draco gave a slight nod. He didn't walk away immediately. He stood there for a long moment, just looking at her. Not as a Gryffindor. Not as a war hero. Just as someone who was just as broken as he was. Finally, he stepped back. He retreated to his side of the room. He sat down at his perfectly neat desk. He picked up his silver quill. Hermione sat back down in her chair. She pulled the sketch of the banners toward her and picked up her quill. She didn't tap it against her teeth. Dipping it in the ink, she carefully drew a thin, precise line along the edge of the drawing. The suite was quiet again, but the physical barrier between them was gone. The line had been crossed. She was tapping the quill against her teeth again. 1, 2, 3. Draco didn't look up from the parchment in front of him. He simply reached across the space between their desks and pushed a small ceramic cup toward her. It slid smoothly over the polished oak and stopped exactly at the edge of her notes. Hermione blinked. She lowered the quill. Steam curled off the top of the tea. It smelled like bergamot and honey. "I didn't ask for tea," she said. "You were clicking," Draco replied, his tone perfectly even. "You only click when you're thirsty or when you're trying to figure out how to seat the Slytherins without starting a duel." She glanced at the seating chart. That was exactly what she was doing. "I'm trying to figure out where to put Zechariah Smith," she admitted, wrapping her fingers around the warm cup. He requested a table near the front. "I want to put him in the owlery. Put him next to Cormac McLagan. They can bore each other to death talking about Quidditch. That's actually brilliant. I am a brilliant man, Granger." 2 weeks had passed since the argument over the banners. 2 weeks since the invisible line dividing the room had quietly dissolved. They hadn't spoken about it. They didn't need to. The hostility hadn't vanished completely. They still bickered. They still snapped when they were tired, but the venom was gone. The Cold War had been replaced by a quiet, efficient truce. She took a sip of the tea. It was perfect. A splash of milk, no sugar. Exactly how she liked it. She didn't know how he knew that. She had never told him. "You misspelled Fortescue," he said. tapping a finger against the vendor list on his side of the desk. I did not. You put a Q instead of a C. Let me see that. She leaned forward, pulling the list out from under his hand. He let it go easily. It was a strange sort of domesticity. They worked in tandem, passing lists back and forth, silently correcting each other's mistakes. When she stayed up too late, he would pointedly extinguish the candles on his side of the room. When he blanked out on the wall for too long, his hand inching toward his left sleeve, she would drop a heavy textbook on the floor just to break the trance. The portrait hole swung open. Hermione, I brought. Harry stopped in his tracks. He stood in the doorway, a crumpled bag from Honeydukes in his hand, watching the two of them. Hermione was leaning across the gap between the desks, her elbow resting inches from Draco's inkwell. Draco was looking at her, his silver quill poised mid-stroke. Draco's expression instantly went blank. The relaxed posture vanished, replaced by the rigid, untouchable mask he wore everywhere else in the castle. Potter, he said. The chill in his voice was back. Harry's eyes darted between them. Malfoy. Hermione straightened up immediately. Harry, you didn't say you were coming up. I brought you chocolate frogs. Harry said slowly, walking into the room. He didn't take his eyes off Draco. Thought you might need a break. From whatever this is. We're doing the seating charts. Hermione said quickly. She felt a sudden, irrational need to defend herself. To prove they were just working. For the memorial ball. It's a nightmare. Harry walked over to her desk. He dropped the Honeydukes bag next to the seating chart. Right, Harry said. He inspected the chart. You put Smith next to McLaggen? Malfoy's idea, she said. Harry raised an eyebrow. He glanced at Draco. Cruel and unusual punishment. I like it. Draco didn't smile. He focused on his ledger. If you're going to stay, Potter, try not to disrupt the workflow. Some of us actually care about meeting McGonagall's deadlines. I'm not staying long, Harry said lightly. But he didn't move. He leaned against the edge of Hermione's desk, crossing his arms. He noticed the ceramic cup in Hermione's hands. Where did you get tea? Harry asked. The kitchens are closed. Malfoy made it, Hermione said. The words hung in the air. Harry looked at the cup. Then he took in Draco. Then Hermione. Malfoy made you tea. Harry repeated. It wasn't a question. He has a kettle in his room, she explained, her voice getting slightly higher. It's just Earl Grey. With a splash of milk and no sugar, Harry said, his volume dropping. He knew exactly how she took her tea. He had made it for her enough times in the tent during the war. Hermione felt a flush of heat rise in her cheeks. She set the cup down. We have a lot of work to do, Harry. The ball is in 2 weeks. Harry didn't push it. He just nodded slowly. Right, he said. He gave Draco one last, unreadable look. I'll let you get back to it. See you at breakfast, Hermione. See you, Harry. He walked to the portrait hole. Just before he climbed out, he glanced back. Nice catch on the tee, Malfoy. He called out. The portrait swung shut before Draco could respond. Silence flooded the room. Hermione focused on the Honeyduke's bag. Her heart was beating entirely too fast. Draco didn't say anything. He didn't look up from his ledger. But she could see the tension in his shoulders, the rigid line of his jaw. He didn't mean anything by it. Hermione said quietly, "Potter always means something by it," Draco replied. His voice was perfectly flat. He's just protective. "He thinks I'm poisoning you." "No, he doesn't. He thinks I'm trying to manipulate you." Draco finally looked up. His grey eyes were sharp and guarded. "He thinks everything I do is a calculated move. He doesn't think that." Hermione insisted. He noticed." "Noticed what, Granger?" "That you know how I take my tea," she thought. "That we aren't fighting anymore. That this feels entirely too comfortable. He noticed that we're actually working together." She said instead. Draco held her gaze for a long moment. Then, he looked away. "We are co-chairs of a committee," he said. The coldness was back. A deliberate distance. "We are working together because we are required to." Hermione felt a strange pang of disappointment. She picked up her quill. "Right. I'm going to finish the vendor payments," he said, pulling a stack of inverses toward him. "You finish the seating chart. Do not speak to me until you are done." "Fine," she snapped. "Fine." They worked in silence for the next 3 hours. The castle grew utterly quiet around them. The fire in the grate died down to glowing red embers. The wind howled against the high tower windows, a lonely, sweeping sound. Hermione rubbed her temples. The names on the parchment were beginning to blur together. She had managed to seat the Gryffindors and the Hufflepuffs, but the Ravenclaws were proving difficult. They all had specific requests. Padma Pottle wanted to sit near the door. Terry Boot wanted to be near the orchestra. She groaned, dropping her head onto her arms. "Are you dying, or just being dramatic?" Draco asked. His voice was quiet. The harsh edge from earlier had faded, worn away by the late hour and the exhaustion. "I'm dying," she muttered into her sleeves. "The Ravenclaws are going to be the end of me." Draco sighed. He stood up. She heard his footsteps cross the stone floor. She didn't lift her head. He stopped next to her chair. "Move," he said. She lifted her head, squinting up at him. "What?" "Bring the chart to the couch." He instructed. "There's more light by the fire. And I am tired of looking at your miserable posture." He walked over to the red armchair and sat down on the edge of the cushions, leaning forward over the low coffee table. Hermione hesitated. They hadn't worked on the couches since the first night. The desks were safe. The desks had a gap between them. But her back ached, and the light really was better by the fire. She gathered the massive seating chart and her quill, walking over to the couches. She sat on the floor, leaning her back against the green armchair, spreading the chart out on the coffee table in front of him. Draco leaned over the parchment. He was close enough that she could smell the soap he used. Something sharp and clean, like cedar and mint. "You put Boot at table 4. He said, pointing to a circle on the paper. He requested to be near the music. Table 4 is next to the kitchens. The music is on the opposite side of the hall." "Oh." Hermione blinked, trying to focus on the lines. Right. Switch him with Goldstein. Draco said. Goldstein doesn't care where he sits as long as he has access to the pumpkin juice. Okay. She scribbled the change, her handwriting sloppy. They worked like that for another hour. Draco pointing out logistical errors, Hermione making the changes. The warmth of the fire was seeping into her bones. The quiet cadence of his voice was lulling her into a strange, heavy state of calm. She was so tired. The Slytherin tables, Draco said quietly. We need to put them near the center. Why? She mumbled. Her eyelids were drooping. Because if we put them in the back, it looks like we're hiding them, he explained. His voice sounded far away. It looks like we're ashamed of them. Makes sense, she whispered. She leaned forward to check the center tables. Her vision swam. The warmth of the fire wrapped around her like a heavy blanket. She let her eyes close. Just for a second. Her head drooped. She felt the solid, warm line of a shoulder against her cheek. The fabric of a soft jumper. For a single, suspended moment, she didn't move. It felt incredibly safe. It felt grounding. She let out a small, tired sigh, her weight settling against him. Draco went completely, utterly rigid. He didn't pull away. He didn't push her. He just stopped breathing entirely. The absolute stillness woke her up faster than a bucket of ice water. Hermione jerked back. She scrambled upright, her knee cracking against the coffee table. I'm sorry. She gasped, her face flooding with heat. I'm so sorry. I fell asleep. I didn't mean to. Draco fixed his gaze straight ahead at the fire. His hands were clenched tightly on his knees. It's fine, he said. His voice was hoarse. I was just looking at the chart, she babbled, completely mortified. I lost my balance. Granger. I'll go back to my desk. Granger, stop talking. She snapped her mouth shut. He slowly turned his head to look at her. The firelight caught the sharp angles of his face, softening them into something almost fragile, not angry, not disgusted, but completely terrified. She stared at him, her pulse racing in her throat. She could still feel the phantom warmth of his shoulder against her cheek. She could still smell the cedar and mint. Go to sleep, he said quietly. We haven't finished. The chart is fine. Go to sleep. He stood up. He didn't look at her again. He walked straight to his room, opening the door and closing it softly behind him. Hermione sat alone on the floor by the fire. She touched her own cheek, right where it had rested against him. The fire was dying, but the spot on her skin was burning hot. She eyed the closed door of his bedroom and tapped her fingers against the edge of the coffee table. 1, 2, 3. She didn't pick up the quill again. The list of names stretched down the length of the heavy parchment. 54 names. 54 people who had died within the walls of the castle. It was the final task for the memorial ball preparation. The official program needed to be sent to the magical printers in Diagon Alley by midnight, and McGonagall had entrusted Hermione with verifying every single spelling. Hermione sat at her desk. The fire in the grate was burning low, casting long, flickering shadows across the stone walls of the head suite. Outside, the October wind howled, rattling the high tower windows. Across the room, Draco was reading a textbook. Since the night by the fire, They had settled into a strange, hyper-aware orbit. They didn't work on the couches anymore. They stayed at their respective desks. But the silence wasn't hostile. It was thick. Electric. Every time she reached for her inkwell, she could feel his eyes flick toward her. Every time he turned a page, she noticed the exact angle of his wrist. They were moving around each other like two people navigating a room full of glass, terrified of shattering the fragile piece they had accidentally built. The line was technically back in place, but they both knew it was a lie. Hermione dragged her focus back to the parchment. She dipped her quill. Abbott, Flora, Bones, Edgar. She moved the quill down the line, checking the vowels, making sure the ink was dark and legible. Her eyes felt gritty. The headache that had been building behind her temples since morning was escalating into a sharp, rhythmic pounding. Brown, lavender. Hermione's hand faltered. A small drop of ink fell from the nib of her quill, blooming into a tiny black star next to Lavender's name. She fixed her eyes on the star. She remembered the way Lavender used to laugh in the dormitory. High and clear. She remembered the way she smelled like vanilla and too much hair potion, the way she used to spread her divination charts all over the floor. Hermione swallowed hard. Her throat felt incredibly tight. She forced her hand to move down the list. Creevy, Colin. The quill shook. She closed her eyes. She could see the flash of his camera. She could hear his breathless, frantic voice asking Harry for a picture in their second year. He was so small. They had laid him out in the Great Hall, and he had looked like a broken doll. She remembered standing over him, realizing for the first time that the war didn't care how young you were. Her chest tightened. The air in the room suddenly felt entirely too thin. She opened her eyes and tried to focus on the parchment, but the letters were beginning to blur. Lupin, Remus, Tonks, Nymphadora, Weasley, Fred. A sharp, ragged breath escaped her lips. She clamped her free hand over her mouth. She was the head girl, the one who was supposed to be holding everything together, not falling apart over a piece of parchment. Picking up her quill again, she tapped it against her teeth in an erratic, frantic rhythm. 1, 2. She didn't make it to 3. A tear broke loose and slid down her cheek, splashing silently onto the parchment, right over Fred's name. She let out a choked, panicked sound. She scrambled to wipe the tear away before it could smudge the ink, but her hands were trembling so badly she only made it worse. A streak of black ink smeared across the white page. Granger. Draco's voice broke through the silence. It wasn't flat. It wasn't cold. She didn't look up. She couldn't. I'm fine. She gasped, scrubbing furiously at the parchment with her sleeve. It's just a smudge. I can cast a drying charm. Granger, stop. She heard his chair push back. She heard his footsteps crossing the room. Fast. She didn't stop. She grabbed her wand with her left hand, but her fingers wouldn't close around the wood properly. Her breathing was coming in short, harsh gasps. I just have to finish it, she babbled, the tears coming faster now, spilling over her eyelashes. McGonagall needs it tonight. The printers are waiting. I just have to finish. Stepping into her space, he didn't hesitate or hover awkwardly like Harry or Ron would have. He reached down and gently but firmly took the quill out of her shaking hand. Give it back, she choked out. No. He set the quill on the desk, out of her reach. Then he took her wand from her other hand and set it down next to the quill. "I have to finish," she repeated, her voice shattering. "You are done," Draco said quietly. He pulled up a heavy wooden chair from the corner of the room and dragged it right next to hers. He sat down. The invisible line in the center of the room shattered into 1,000 pieces. He didn't look at her with pity. He didn't look uncomfortable. He surveyed the ruined parchment, and then he looked at her. "I can't do it," she whispered, the confession tearing out of her throat. The dam had finally broken. The months of holding it together, of being the golden girl, of pretending the war hadn't fundamentally broken her, just collapsed. "I can't look at their names anymore." She buried her face in her hands. A sob wrenched itself from her chest, loud and ugly. She expected him to leave. She expected him to walk away and let her cry in peace, because that's what everyone else did. They gave her space. They thought she was strong enough to handle it alone. Draco didn't leave. He didn't say it's going to be okay, because he knew it was a lie. He didn't tell her to be brave. He simply pulled the heavy parchment toward himself. "You don't have to," he said. His voice was incredibly soft. The same voice he had used when he told her he wanted white banners to catch the light. Hermione peeked through her fingers. Draco summoned a fresh sheet of parchment from his trunk. It floated across the room and landed perfectly on the desk. He picked up his silver quill. "What are you doing?" she managed to say between sobs. "I am finishing the list," he replied. "You can't." "I am perfectly capable of writing, Granger." They're not your names." Draco stopped. He observed the list of the fallen. The people who had died fighting against his own family. The people whose blood was on the hands of the army he had been forced to join. He read the name of a boy who had been tortured by his own aunt. He read the name of a werewolf his former professor had murdered. His jaw tightened, a brief flash of the old, familiar self-loathing. But he didn't put the quill down. "They are now," he said. He dipped the silver quill into the inkwell. He began to write. His penmanship was immaculate. Sharp, precise, elegant lettering. Hermione sat next to him, her breathing still ragged. The tears were still falling, but the panic had stopped. She watched his hand move across the page. Abbott, Flora, Bones, Edgar. He wrote the names with absolute care. He didn't rush. He treated every single letter with a quiet, devastating reverence. Brown, Lavender, Creevy, Cullen. He didn't flinch. He just kept writing, taking the burden entirely onto his own shoulders so she didn't have to carry it anymore. "You don't have to do this," Hermione whispered. "Be quiet and let me work," he murmured back, but there was no bite to it. Hermione rested her arms on the desk. She laid her head down on her crossed arms, turning her face so she could watch him. The firelight danced over his pale skin. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his side. She could smell the familiar, grounding scent of cedar and mint. He was a Malfoy. He was a former Death Eater. He was the boy who had called her a mudblood in the courtyard. And right now, he was the only person in the entire world who made her feel safe. The realization didn't terrify her. It felt completely inevitable. She watched the steady, rhythmic movement of his hand. Lupin, Remus, Tonks, Nymphadora, Weasley, Fred. He wrote the names of the people who had fought his father. He wrote them beautifully. The rhythm of his writing was hypnotic. The scratching of the quill against the parchment was the only sound in the room, steady and calm. Hermione's eyelids felt impossibly heavy. The exhaustion of the past month, the emotional crash of the breakdown, the sheer relief of not having to be strong for just 1 hour, all hit her at once. "I'm sorry I yelled at you about the banners," she mumbled sleepily. Draco's hand paused for a fraction of a second. "I'm sorry I told you it was a farce." "It is a farce," she whispered, her eyes drifting shut. "But we're going to make it a very nice farce." A quiet breath escaped him. It sounded suspiciously like a laugh. "Yes," he said softly. "We are." Hermione let out a long, shuddering sigh. Her muscles finally relaxed. The tension melted out of her shoulders, out of her back. She didn't fight the sleep anymore. She just let it pull her under. Draco finished the final name on the list. He set his silver quill down. He carefully dried the ink with a silent wave of his wand. He rolled the parchment up and tied it with a piece of dark ribbon, setting it aside for McGonagall's owl in the morning. The task was done. He turned his head. Hermione was asleep. Her face was turned toward him, her cheek resting on her arms. Her breathing was deep and even. The tear tracks were still visible on her skin, drying in the warmth of the fire. Her braid had completely fallen apart. Wild, unruly curls spilled over her shoulders and across the desk, dangerously close to the inkwell. Draco watched her. He didn't move away. He didn't get up and go to his room like he had the last time. He looked at the girl who had saved the wizarding world. The girl who was supposed to be his enemy. The girl who was currently sleeping at his desk because he was the only one who had bothered to stay when she broke. The guilt in his chest, the heavy, suffocating weight he had carried for a year, didn't vanish. But it shifted. It made room for something else. Something terrifying and warm. He slowly reached out. His hand trembled slightly. He hesitated, his fingers hovering in the air above her desk. If she woke up, he would have no excuse. He would have no defense. But she didn't stir. He gently brushed a stray curl away from her face, tucking it behind her ear. His fingers lingered. He let his hand drop lower, the side of his thumb resting feather-light against the soft skin of her neck, just below her jawline. Her skin was warm. Her pulse beat steadily against his fingertips. Draco didn't pull away. He sat in the quiet, violet room, his hand resting gently against her neck, and let himself finally stop running. The music started in the great hall, a slow, mournful sweep of strings that seemed to echo off the ancient stone walls. Hermione stood near the heavy oak doors, watching the room fill with people. The transformation of the hall was breathtaking. The 4 long house tables had been pushed back to the edges of the room to create a massive, sweeping dance floor. The enchanted ceiling reflected a clear, starlit October sky, a stark contrast to the heavy clouds that had been hanging over the castle all week. Above them, the white banners hung in long, elegant arcs. Draco had been right. The thin gold trim caught the light of the hundreds of floating candles, making the edges spark and shimmer as the draft caught the fabric. It didn't look like a Gryffindor victory parade. It looked like a dawn breaking after a very long, very dark night. Students and staff were dressed in formal robes, moving quietly through the space. There was no loud chatter. The mood was solemn, respectful. Even Peeves was absent, seemingly understanding the gravity of the evening. Near the center of the room, the floral arrangement she had compromised on stood tall and fragrant. White lilies and silver sage. Small clusters of students were already gathering around them, paying their respects, leaving small tokens and whispered words. Hermione smoothed her trembling hands down the front of her dress. It was a deep, midnight blue silk that left her shoulders bare, trailing gracefully behind her when she walked. She felt entirely too exposed, and her heart was beating an erratic, uncomfortable rhythm against her ribs. She hadn't seen Draco since she woke up at her desk 3 days ago. When she had opened her eyes that morning, the room had been perfectly empty. The memorial list had been flawlessly completed, dried, and tied with a dark ribbon, ready for McGonagall's owl. There had been a fresh cup of tea on her desk, charmed to stay warm. But Draco had been gone. He had avoided the suite during the day, spending his time in the library or out on the grounds. When he returned at night, she had already retreated to her bedroom, hiding behind a locked door, too cowardly to face him. She didn't know how to look at him. Not after breaking down so completely. Not after waking up with the phantom, burning sensation of his fingers brushing against her neck. "You look nervous." The voice sent a jolt of pure electricity straight down her spine. Hermione turned. Draco was standing beside her. He was wearing perfectly tailored black dress robes, the cut sharp and modern, completely devoid of the traditional heavy velvet his father favored. The stark black made his pale skin and silver eyes stand out even more. His blonde hair was neat, but not slicked back, falling slightly across his forehead. He looked older. He looked devastating. "I'm not nervous." Hermione lied, her voice coming out slightly breathless, betraying her instantly. "I'm just reviewing the logistics. Mentally checking the catering schedule." "The logistics are fine," Draco said. His grey eyes swept over her, taking in the blue silk, the way her hair was pinned up in a loose knot, the nervous tension rigid in her shoulders. His gaze lingered for a fraction of a second on the bare expanse of her neck. "The banners look acceptable." "Acceptable?" She echoed, a weak attempt at a smile finally pulling at her lips. "They look beautiful." "I suppose they do." They stood side by side, watching the crowd. The gap between them was barely 2 inches. She could feel the heat radiating from him, a physical pull that she was desperately trying to ignore. Across the hall, she caught sight of Harry and Ron. They were standing near the punch bowl. Ron was glaring openly in Draco's direction, his face flushed. Harry just looked tired, watching them with a careful, calculating gaze. "McGonagall is looking at us," Draco noted quietly, pulling her attention back. Hermione followed his gaze. The headmistress was standing near the orchestra pit, giving them a pointed, expectant look. "It's time," Hermione whispered, her stomach doing a nervous flip. As the head boy and head girl, they were required to open the dance floor. It was a centuries-old Hogwarts tradition, one that they had both silently agreed not to talk about during their weeks of planning sessions. It had seemed like a distant problem. Now, it was terrifyingly immediate. "Are you ready?" Draco asked. He didn't sound sarcastic. He didn't sound mocking. He sounded like he was genuinely asking. Hermione took a slow, deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. "Yes." Draco offered his arm. She hesitated for a split second before slipping her hand through the crook of his elbow. The muscle beneath his dark sleeve was completely rigid. He was just as tense as she was. They walked out onto the empty dance floor together. The murmur of the crowd died down instantly. Hundreds of eyes turned to watch them. The Golden Girl and the former Death Eater, stepping into the center of the room in absolute silence. Their combined histories pressed down heavily on the hall. Hermione kept her eyes fixed firmly on the sharp line of the lapel of his robes. She could feel the stares burning into her skin. They reached the dead center of the hall, right beneath the largest cluster of floating candles. The strings swelled, shifting from a mournful note into a slow, sweeping waltz. Draco turned to face her. He didn't hesitate. He stepped squarely into her space, closing the gap between them. His right hand settled firmly on her waist. His touch was warm and heavy through the thin silk of her dress, a solid, grounding anchor in the middle of a room full of ghosts. Hermione placed her left hand tentatively on his shoulder. Her right hand found his left. His long fingers closed around hers securely. They began to move. He was a perfect dancer. It was ingrained in him, years of pure-blood societal training translating into effortless, fluid motion. He guided her across the floor with an easy, terrifying confidence that she wholly lacked. "You're stepping on my feet, Granger," he murmured, his voice pitched perfectly low so only she could hear it over the music. "I'm not." She whispered back, her face flushing with immediate heat. "You missed the tempo twice. You're anticipating the turn. I'm distracted." "By what?" "By you," she almost said. "By the way you smell like cedar and mint. By the fact that your hand is branding my waist and I don't want you to let go." "The crowd," she said instead. She forced herself to look up, meeting his eyes. "Everyone is staring at us." Draco didn't look at the crowd. He kept his eyes entirely, exclusively on her. "Let them stare," he said softly. He pulled her a fraction of an inch closer. The physical proximity broke the last fragile remnants of the wall she had tried to rebuild over the last 3 days. There was no space left for hostility. There was no space for the war, or the blood prejudice, or the bitter past they shared. There was only the heavy, suffocating tension between them, pulling them toward an inevitable collision. Hermione's breathing hitched. "Malfoy," she breathed. "Don't," he whispered back, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating with restraint. "Don't ruin it by overthinking, Granger." They turned across the floor, the white and gold banners sweeping over their heads in a blur of color and light. Hermione stopped trying to track the tempo. She let him lead entirely, her body naturally following the pull of his hand on her waist. It felt remarkably like falling. "You didn't stay," she whispered. The words slipped out before she could stop them. "The other night. When I woke up, you were gone." Draco's jaw tightened. He looked away for a second, his gaze fixing on the enchanted stars above them, before looking back down at her. "I stayed until you fell asleep," he said quietly. "Why did you leave?" "Because if you had woken up and looked at me." He trailed off. His grip on her hand tightened slightly, his knuckles turning white. "I didn't want you to regret letting me stay." "I didn't regret it." The music swelled, the orchestra reaching a sweeping crescendo. Draco spun her out, her blue silk dress flaring, and pulled her back in, the movement utterly fluid. When she collided softly against his chest, his hand slid slightly higher on her back, pressing her flush against him. "You should," he murmured. The words were a warning, but there was absolutely no conviction behind them. "I don't," she insisted, her voice fierce despite the breathless whisper. They stopped moving across the floor. They were just swaying now, the walls forgotten, completely lost in the small space between them. Draco looked down at her face. He looked at the frantic pulse jumping at the base of her throat. Slowly, deliberately, he shifted his hand. He released her waist, moving his hand up until his fingers brushed against the bare skin of her shoulder, trailing up the sensitive side of her neck. Hermione gasped softly, her eyes fluttering shut for a second. It was exactly where he had touched her in the head suite. His thumb rested lightly against her jawline. The heat of his skin was scorching. The rest of the students were beginning to join the dance floor. The spell of the solo dance was broken. Couples flooded into the center of the room, swirling past them in a blur of formal robes and polite conversation. Draco and Hermione didn't notice. They were standing perfectly still in the middle of the chaos, oblivious to the world around them. "Draco," she whispered. It was the first time she had ever used his given name. It felt heavy on her tongue. It felt devastatingly right. His eyes darkened. The silver in his irises looked almost black in the candlelight. He leaned in. His face was inches from hers. She could feel his breath against her cheek. She tilted her chin up, completely surrendered to the pull, waiting for the inevitable crash. But he didn't close the distance. He stopped, his forehead resting lightly against hers. "Not here," he said. His voice was a harsh, ragged whisper. "Not in front of them." Hermione opened her eyes. She looked at the hundreds of people spinning around them. She looked at Harry and Ron, who was standing at the edge of the floor, watching them with guarded, tense expressions. She understood. The Great Hall belonged to the war. It belonged to the public, to the grief, to the expectations. What was happening between them didn't belong to anyone else. It was theirs alone. "Okay," she whispered back. Draco dropped his hand from her neck. He stepped back, putting a respectable, agonizing inch of space between them. He offered his arm again. Hermione took it. They didn't look back at the crowd. They didn't look at McGonagall or Harry. Together, they walked off the dance floor, cutting a straight line through the sea of formal robes, and walked out the heavy oak doors, leaving the Great Hall entirely behind. The corridors were completely deserted. Everyone was in the Great Hall, swept up in the sweeping waltz and the solemn grace of the memorial. The castle, usually bustling with students and ghosts and clattering armor, belonged entirely to the two of them. They walked in silence. Draco didn't offer his arm again once they cleared the oak doors, and Hermione didn't reach for it. The space between them was practically vibrating with unsaid things. The sound of their footsteps, his sharp and measured against the flagstones, her soft and slightly uneven, echoed loudly in the empty hallways. The air was thick. Heavy. The faint, fading sound of the orchestra followed them up the first flight of stairs, then disappeared entirely, leaving them wrapped in the quiet of the high towers. Hermione's pulse was hammering a frantic, undeniable rhythm in her throat, right where his thumb had rested minutes ago. The skin there still felt scorched. She didn't look at him, but she could feel him walking beside her, a dark, solid presence in the dim corridor light. They reached the portrait hole to the head suite. Password. the portrait demanded, looking at them with a raised, judgmental eyebrow. Phoenix, Draco said. His voice was rough, scraping against the silence. The portrait swung open. They stepped inside. The suite was exactly as they had left it hours ago. The fire was burning low in the grate, casting long, warm shadows over the two identical desks and the red and green armchairs. The invisible line that had divided the room for months was nothing but a memory. Hermione stood near the center of the room. She wrapped her arms tightly around herself, suddenly hyper-aware of the quiet. Outside the high tower windows, the October storm continued to rage, rain lashing against the glass, but inside it was perfectly still. The heavy oak door shut behind them with a definitive click. Draco stopped near the door. He didn't move toward his bedroom. He didn't move toward his perfectly organized desk. He just stood there, looking at her. The stark black dress robes made him look like a shadow against the dark wood of the door. Granger, he said. The word was barely a breath, carrying a terrifying amount of gravity. Hermione turned to face him. What are we doing, Malfoy? She asked. Her voice trembled, completely stripped of her usual commanding authority. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. The muscle in his jaw jumped. I don't know. You touched me, she whispered. I know. On the dance floor. In front of everyone. I know. You don't do things without a reason, she challenged, taking a half step toward him. The desperate need for clarity, for him to admit it first, was tearing at her. You calculate everything. You plan every move. So why did you do it? Draco opened his eyes. The silver in them was fractured, completely laid bare. Because I couldn't stop myself. He confessed. The words sounded like they were dragged out of him against his will, jagged and bloody. Hermione stopped. 4 months. He continued, his voice dropping to a harsh, ragged whisper. I have sat in this room and watched you. I watched you organize a memorial for a war you shouldn't have had to fight. I watched you cry over names that I should have protected. I watched you tap that ridiculous quill against your teeth until I thought I was going to lose my absolute mind. He took a step toward her. The space between them shrank. I tried to stay on my side of the line, he said, gesturing vaguely to the empty floor between them. I tried to be the villain you thought I was. I tried to make you hate me, because it was easier when you hated me. It made sense. I never hated you. She breathed. You should have, he countered bitterly, his voice rising in volume. You had every right to. The entire school hates me, Granger, and they didn't even have to bleed on my floor. I didn't hate you. You are the golden girl. He said, you are the war hero. You are the one who saved everyone. He took another step. He was close enough now that she could feel the heat radiating from him. And I am the coward who stood there and watched my aunt carve a slur into your arm. Hermione flinched, the sharp memory flashing behind her eyes. But she didn't step back. She didn't retreat. She looked up at him. She saw the absolute devastation in his face. She saw the guilt that had been eating him alive since the day they returned to Hogwarts, the suffocating guilt he carried every single day. You didn't want them to hurt me, she said quietly. Wanting isn't enough, he snapped, his voice breaking completely. It didn't stop the knife. It didn't stop the pain. No, it didn't. Hermione reached out. Her hand trembled in the air for a second before she pressed her palm flat against the center of his chest. His heart was hammering wildly beneath the dark silk of his robes. Fast. Panicked. Draco froze. He looked down at her small hand against his chest, his breath catching audibly in his throat. "But you're here now," she whispered, stepping into his space. "You wrote their names when I couldn't bear to look at them anymore. You made sure the banners caught the light. You stayed by the fire when I broke down. Granger." "Stop telling me I should hate you," she demanded, her voice finally finding its fierce, Gryffindor edge. She gripped the lapel of his robes, forcing him to look at her. "Stop trying to run away from this. Stop punishing yourself for surviving." He looked at her, his eyes searching her face frantically, looking for a way out, looking for a reason to pull away. "If I don't run away," he said, his voice completely raw, stripped of all armor, "I will ruin you." "I'm already ruined," she said, her voice cracking. "We all are. We're all just trying to put the broken pieces back together." She slid her hand slowly up his chest, her fingers curling over the stiff collar of his robes. "Put them back together with me," she whispered. Something in Draco finally, completely snapped. The very last thread of his ironclad restraint broke. He moved so fast she barely had time to register it. His hands caught her face, his long fingers tangling desperately in the loose curls at the nape of her neck, tilting her head up. He kissed her. It wasn't a sweet, hesitant, exploratory kiss. It was a violent explosion. It was months of bitter arguments, of late nights staring at the fire, of survivor's guilt and shared trauma and terrifying, undeniable gravity, all colliding at once in the center of the room. Hermione gasped against his mouth, her hands flying up to grip his shoulders, anchoring herself to him in the storm. He kissed her like he was drowning and she was the only air left in the entire castle. His mouth was hard and demanding, hot and desperate, consuming her completely. Hermione kissed him back with equal ferocity. She pulled him closer, her fingers twisting into the dark silk at the nape of his neck, rising onto her toes to meet the desperate, hungry angle of his mouth. The smell of cedar and mint completely surrounded her, overwhelming her senses. The heat of his hands on her skin sent sparks racing down her spine. He walked her backward, his mouth never leaving hers, their steps clumsy and frantic, until her back hit the solid wood of her desk. The impact knocked the breath out of her, but she didn't care. She wrapped her arms tightly around his neck, pulling him flush against her. Draco groaned, a low, guttural sound that vibrated against her lips. His hands slid down from her hair to grip her waist, pulling her impossibly closer, eradicating any remaining space between their bodies. They were a mess of tangled limbs and desperate breaths. Every time they tried to pull away for air, they crashed back together seconds later, completely unable to break the intoxicating contact. It was a reckoning. It was the absolute destruction of the barrier they had spent months meticulously building. Finally, after what felt like hours, Draco tore his mouth away. He rested his forehead heavily against hers, both of them panting. His chest heaved against hers in the quiet room. His hands were still gripping her waist like a lifeline, his thumbs pressing into the silk of her dress. Hermione kept her eyes closed, her fingers still tangled in the soft blonde hair at the base of his neck. Her lips were swollen, burning with the heavy ghost of his kiss. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the ragged sound of their breathing and the rain hitting the window. "Hermione," he whispered. It was the first time he had ever said her given name. A violent shiver ripped through her body. The sound of it on his tongue was devastating. Beautiful. Yes. She breathed back, opening her eyes. Draco slowly pulled back just enough to look at her face. His silver eyes were entirely clear. The frantic desperation was gone, replaced by something steady, solid, and incredibly warm. "Are you sure?" he asked. The question was heavy. It carried the burden of the war, the blood prejudice, the inevitable, vicious backlash they would face from the wizarding world tomorrow morning. Hermione didn't hesitate. She looked straight into his eyes, seeing the boy who had fixed her memorial list, the boy who took his tea with a splash of milk and no sugar. "I have never been more sure of anything," she promised. Draco let out a long, shuddering breath. The tension completely drained out of his shoulders, leaving him entirely relaxed for the first time in a year. He leaned down and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to the corner of her mouth. Then another to her jaw. Hermione let her head fall back, completely surrendering to the gentle press of his lips against her skin. He wrapped his arms fully around her, burying his face in the crook of her neck, just holding her tightly against the edge of the desk. They stood there in the quiet, firelit room for a long time. Outside, the heavy storm clouds broke, and the faint, pale light of the moon spilled through the high tower windows, casting a silver glow across the stone floor. The invisible line that had divided them was gone. It had been replaced by something messy, complicated, and entirely theirs. They were broken, yes. But as Hermione rested her cheek against the top of Draco's head, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart against her chest, she knew they were going to put the pieces back together. Together.